There's so much investment into aging right now. That's going to ultimately help us with all these other chronic diseases.
For those looking to maximize their health and live longer, what are the latest developments in stem cell research, which seems to be an area of expertise for you that can help people achieve that goal?
Yeah, so I'm going to have to give a little bit of a history lesson so people can understand kind of the progression of stem cell research, because stem cells have been around for a while, and to the point where even in when George Bush was president, there was a lot of discussion because of embryonic stem cells and the controversy around that, and then about the potential of stem cells. But then it kind of went to the background because obviously you're not going to harm fetuses to take stem cells. There's so many ethical issues with that. So then they kind of figured out, okay, we can start using umbilical cord stem cells. But then the problem was what's the right dosing? What's the right frequency? And we can't really control the cells to do what we want. So now we're entering this era, which is very exciting, what's called synthetic biology, which is genetic engineering of cells. So these are the latest breakthroughs in which we can actually control the cells, similar to how we can control drugs to do what we want and send the signals we want. These are called induced pluripotent stem cells, or iPSC cells. They're used, it's from Professor Yamanaka, who I talk about all the time, but he's a Nobel Prize winner from Japan. And he got the Nobel Prize because he figured out how to take any somatic cell in your body. So you could take a skin cell, a muscle cell, and you could basically turn it back into a baby stem cell. It's kind of crazy, right? It's the fact that your body has this innate memory to basically reverse age of a cell is pretty wild, first of all. So it's hard to even comprehend that, because it's you could take any old cell in your body and you can make it like a baby stem cell.
How is it that we figured out how to do that with cells, but we haven't yet figured out how to do that with the organism?
Yeah, because the problem is because... And this is what's going to happen, though. And my prediction is, down the road, we will be able to do that with the whole organism, which is epigenetic reprogramming. Basically, we can take your whole body and we can de-age you using the cellular reprogramming approach. That's not there yet, but that's what I think will happen in the future. For now, what we can do is we can take cells from your body or from someone else's bodies, we can reprogram them. And so this is called induced pluripotent stem cells, iPSCs, and then you can differentiate them into different cell lines. So for example, what we have now is I like to call them second generation stem cells or second generation exosomes. Exosomes are kind of like the soup or the broth the stem cells grow in, and they have all the cytokine profile and the proteins and growth factors to reduce inflammation. They can cross the blood-brain barrier. And so what we can do is we can engineer these cells to target specific pathways. So instead of just being okay, we'll give you umbilical cord stem cells, they do have a general anti-inflammatory effect and definitely have a lot of potential benefits. But the problem is there's so much heterogeneity, meaning there's variability in terms of results, in terms of application, in terms of even dosing, because if you get one donor versus another donor, there might be variability in the actual quality of the stem cells. So you can't standardize it. So with iPSCs, we can standardize them. So that's the biggest kind of breakthrough. And this has been seen. This year, they published a trial for Parkinson's disease, and they actually transplanted iPSC-derived dopamine-producing neurons into the caudate putamen, which is in the brain where they lose the dopamine neurons. And they actually showed engraftment of these cells and produced new dopamine neurons. So it's like regenerating brain tissue. How crazy is that?
That's insane.
Yeah. And so,
wow.
And that's the potential of iPSC. So we have iPSCs now for exosomes, and we're in the process of manufacturing different iPSCs for aging. So we'll have that later this year.
That's amazing. And where are they getting? You mentioned the placenta. Is that the primary source from which they're harvesting
So that's the
these
first
cells?
generation stem cells, which is from perinatal fluid or placental tissue or umbilical cord tissue or umbilical cord fluid. But the second generation, you can just take from any cell in your body or someone else's body, and you can just reprogram it. So second generation is really cool because you can have basically what's called an immortal cell line, where you have one donor, and then you can just make an infinite amount of cells from that one donor.
Wow. So where would be the go-to de facto place from which to harvest those cells?
Skin is easiest because it's just the easiest place to get a biopsy. You can just do a skin biopsy, and then you can use that skin cell, a fibroblast, and then you can use cellular reprogramming, and then you can turn those cells into whatever you want.
You can turn a skin cell into a neuron.
Yeah.
And then implant them into the part of the brain.
It's called the iPSC-derived neural progenitor cell. So neural progenitor meaning it's a progenitor, which means it has the ability to turn into new neurons, and then you can transplant them into the brain. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's one of the things we have in the pipeline. We have a neurosurgeon on our team for dementia and Parkinson's and also in multiple sclerosis, is to use those neuroprogenitor cells into the brain directly. Right now, we're using the first generation ones, and we inject them via carotid artery or into the brain. We have a neurointerventional radiologist, and he actually injects the umbilical cord stem cells and exosomes directly into the brain, which still makes a significant impact on dementia and Alzheimer's. And the sad reality is he's been doing it for 8 years in Dubai, Turkey, Pakistan, all these places. And it's still not even on the radar in the U.S.
Wow.
So,
That's insane. But in a condition like, Alzheimer's disease, for example, which is the most common form of dementia, I mean, there's widespread degeneration, right, across the cortex, like in many different parts of the brain. So how do you then know, like, how do you know where to inject
That's
the
the cool
cells?
thing about, I know it sounds kind of, when I first thought it, I was like, how do the cells know what to do? But then they have something called a homing mechanism, which is really cool. So stem cells, there's something called chemokines that get released from cells that are damaged. And those chemokines basically tell the stem cells like, hey, come here and help and repair this tissue. It's the craziest thing. And they actually have like you can actually see these like high resolution microscopic kind of pictures, and you can actually see the cell migrating to the area of damage. It's so cool.
In the past, they were blowing them up people's noses, were they not?
Yeah, intranasal. You can still do intranasal exosomes and nebulize them too, which is a way to get them into the brain. But then that's what we do with like intranasal insulin, for example, too, is a thing that can be used for dementia as well. So there's all these kind of unknown therapies out there that people probably haven't heard about because most doctors just don't know about them when it comes to these neurodegenerative conditions.
Would you say the neurodegenerative suite of conditions, that's like really the cutting edge of where this science is going?
I'd say aging, because aging is the hugest, like there's just so much investment going into that from like Silicon Valley, like private equity, all the billionaires who want to live forever. And there's just a massive amount of investment going into basically curing aging, because they're saying aging is a chronic disease. So if it is a chronic disease and we can solve it, aging is arguably the most complex chronic disease. So if you can solve that, you can solve a lot of other chronic diseases. Because if you think about it, dementia, what's the biggest risk factor for it?
Age.
Exactly. So if you can solve for aging, then you're going to help, ultimately you're going to help dementia as well. And what are the drivers for that, right? It's chronic inflammation, it's oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction. It's all these what are called 12 hallmarks or 10 to 12 hallmarks of aging. And once you can understand those root fundamental principles and you can use cellular technology and genetic technology to kind of reprogram the cells, then you can actually potentially cure it. And that's the goal. So I think because there's so much investment into aging right now, that's going to ultimately help us with all these other chronic diseases.
And what's the difference between iPSCs, these induced pluripotent stem cells that you've referenced, and I'm somewhat more familiar with mesenchymal stem cells?
Yeah. So mesenchymal stem cells are derived from umbilical cord tissue or from your fat or bone marrow. So that fat and bone marrow are allowed in the US, but you're not allowed to culture expand them. So for example, you can go to like a clinic in LA and you can get stem cells, but they're not actually stem cells. They're what are called committed progenitor cells, or what are called medicinal signaling cells. So what that means is these cells aren't really going to regenerate new tissue, but what they're going to do is they're going to send signals. They're going to help to reduce inflammation, which will still have a beneficial effect. But the problem is it's kind of confuses people because people don't realize that they're not actually getting true stem cells. And like if you want to get true stem cells, like you were saying, you have to get mesenchymal, which you have to isolate from the bone marrow or the fat or umbilical cord tissue, and then you have to grow them for like 3 or 4 weeks, and then you can inject them or infuse them or do whatever you like with them.
Got it. So the iPSC cells it's sort of like the new version.
Yeah, the iPSC is essentially, instead of taking them from any tissue from your body, you just you can use a donor, but you can take them from the skin and just reprogram them.
Wow.
So instead of having to, and it's really cool because then instead of having to like, collect them and harvest them, it just saves so much on the manufacturing side. If you think about it, it's a lot easier. But the biggest risk with iPSCs was always the fact that they can turn into tumors or cancer, because iPSCs are almost like embryonic stem cells. So they have too much stemness. So meaning they can keep growing and have uncontrolled proliferation. So the technology we have is with a company that we've partnered with, they have a gene edit. So that gene edit prevents uncontrolled proliferation. So when if the cells start replicating without control, it's like a kill switch. It'll stop the cells from growing. So we're the only ones, as far as I know, in the world who have that technology. It wasn't developed by us, but it was developed by this company that spent 7-8 years of research, and we have like this kind of exclusive licensing with them.
Wow, and you're doing this up in Canada, correct?
I mean, all over. We're doing clinical trials in Canada, but also we're doing some in Prospera, Honduras, because we have a research lab there. We're doing some in Mexico, and then I'm also doing in Dubai. So all over. And then I do some work in Japan as well.
Wow. And so what's the legal status of stem cell therapeutics here in the U.S.?
So they're, I would say, 10 years behind most of the world.
Wow.
So meaning, that's not just me saying, it's just Japan, for example. I always like to use Japan as an example because they're actually leaders when it comes to innovation, technology, even medicine. There are a lot of their work. They have longevity. A lot of they have so many centurions. They have so many other positive health outcome and health data. And so in Japan, they've had a regulatory framework for regulating how stem cells can be administered for 10 years, meaning they are legal, but they do control, like regulate who can do it, how it's done. But in the US, they just said, no, you can't do them. So FDA just says they're illegal, essentially illegal. So it's kind of unfortunate because obviously there is benefits for them, but it has to just be done in the right way. And when you make it illegal like that, then you kind of have this almost like black market. You have so many doctors offering stem cells throughout the US, and FDA can't keep up. They can't shut them all down. There's like hundreds, if not thousands, of stem cell clinics now in the US, but most of them aren't doing things properly.
They're not doing things properly. Interesting. Yeah, the
well, it's illegal. So then first of all, you're doing something that's not even allowed. So you have to skirt regulatory bodies, and then it's like, how do you even, like, there's just so many things you have to navigate, right?
Yeah. Is that why I remember reading a statistic a couple years back that it takes on average 17 years for what's discovered in science to be put into day-to-day clinical practice.
Exactly. It's called a clinical translation gap. It's probably between 15 to 20 years. So 17 is probably bang on, right?
Yeah, it's such a huge,
and that's so sad, right? Because there's all these people who could get help, and they're suffering with chronic illness, and they think there's no hope. And that's why how I learn is not only reading scientific papers, but talking to scientific experts, like who are like domain experts in this specific area. So like whether it's about peptides or stem cells or gene therapy, I'm talking to scientists whose life work is that stuff. And that's where I learned from, because they're what they've already figured out is so far ahead of what medicine's going to apply in real, to see most patients get access to that. So I'm trying to make that go faster.
I love that.
Using this, like, I call it the disruptive model of basically going offshore, and then using obviously social media and other platforms to kind of tell people, hey, there is hope for you. Maybe maybe we can help you.
Have you encountered controversy? Have you encountered pushback from your colleagues in mainstream medicine?
A ton.
And
because it's just, unfortunately, when you're going against the grain of, especially in Canada, which is a very like conservative type of culture in terms of like innovation, and like just, people just want to follow what Health Canada says, follow guidelines, follow standard of care. That's just kind of the approach. So there's a lot of other doctors who'll say that, oh, that stuff is nonsense or doesn't work, or whatever it may be. And there's always going to be, I think, unfortunately, the more notoriety you get, the more people who are going to come after you. And it's not, and I'm not trying to show off or anything. It's just, I do treat, like, I've treated top NFL players, NHL players. I've treated some of the wealthiest people in the world. And like, I just figure why are a lot of those people coming to me if I was like a snickel salesman, or like trying to, especially pro athletes, like their body is their career.
Yeah.
And like, they wouldn't be coming to me if this stuff didn't work. You know
and
what I mean?
What are the kinds of conditions where you've seen the greatest success?
Chronic pain, for sure, is the one that we can reproducibly treat with a very high success rate. Almost everyone gets better, and it's remarkable. And then the other thing that, it's been amazing lately is something we do called the vagus nerve injection. So the vagus nerve and a stellate ganglion block. So it's a combination procedure. So stellate ganglion block has been around for like 20 years or so. It's this sympathetic ganglion around their neck area, and basically feeds into your sympathetic nervous system. But what happens is a lot of people are hyper aroused or stressed all the time, and especially if you have PTSD or trauma or anxiety, which nowadays unresolved emotional trauma is so common, and we're finding out more and more that this is the root cause of a lot of mental health disorders. So your nervous system kind of remembers that. And so what we do is we inject anesthetic into the stellate ganglion and also peptides, and that calms down that sympathetic overdrive. And then we also inject into the vagus nerve exosomes and peptides, which just modulates or kind of reprograms or reboots the vagus nerve and helps with nervous system dysfunction. So to your question, I would say that has the most dramatic effects, to the point where I've had girls like who were like 23, 24, and they were like, close to suicidal, severe panic attacks, like just tried every med, tried therapy, and couldn't get anything. We do the injection, which takes like 5-10 minutes, and then they're crying like 10 minutes later because they have relief, and which they haven't had for 2 years.
Whoa.
I know.
So injections of these stem cells?
No, exosomes and peptides.
Exosomes and peptides.
And anesthetic, yeah.
Got it.
And exosomes, is just to remind everyone, is kind of the broth, or that. So if you have chickens, I would say if you have chicken soup, the meat is the stem cells, and the broth is the exosomes. So it has all the nutrients in there, but no actual stem cells, because you don't actually need you only need the signaling molecules depending on what you're trying to achieve. Sometimes you need the stem cells, sometimes you just need the exosomes. It depends on what what you're trying to treat.
So exosomes, then they are, it's basically this soup, if you will, of to use your term, but it basically signals to your body that there's a site that requires a little bit of extra attention.
Exactly.
And it encourages your own body to come to the site of the injection.
Yes.
And do the repair work?
Exactly.
Wow.
And that's how different peptides work too. I don't know if you've heard of like BPC 157 or TB4, TB500.
Yeah, but I haven't done too deep a dive. So what's the deal? A lot of people are talking about these compounds.
Well, the reason is, so peptides have been around, like insulin was one of the first peptides synthesized like 100 years ago. And so in the last like decade or two, there's been a huge revolution, I would say, of isolating different peptides. Ozempic is probably the most famous now. Like, I think most people have heard of Ozempic because it's a weight loss peptide. But what is Ozempic? Ozempic is basically what's called a GLP-1 agonist, which means it sends a signal to your body to increase satiety or fullness. And it kind of just makes you nauseous. And so that's how people lose weight, which is fine. But the problem is most people end up regaining weight, and there's other risks with it too. But the point is, it's a peptide. It sends a signal, a very specific task, and that's what peptides in general do. So BPC 157 sends a signal to your body to help with different regenerative pathways. So it facilitates healing and regeneration. So some people call it like the Wolverine peptide because it can make you heal faster. And I've seen in acute settings, it's phenomenal. If you have like a sprain or strain and you get BPC 157, it can really help the recovery process just go a lot faster.
Wow.
But the problem is, and this is the issue, is that because these aren't patented right now, FDA decided that because they're not being prescribed like by pharmacists, there's just kind of like, you can order them online, right? And the problem is there's not a lot of oversight on them right now. So FDA decided to ban them essentially. So now they're illegal in the US, which is which is a shame, because I'm not saying that people should be ordering them online, but I'm saying if you do it under a physician who prescribes it through a compounding pharmacy, what's wrong with that? And they made it, now compounding pharmacies can't make them anymore.
Wow. Because it's illegal to prescribe them in the US?
Because the compounding pharmacies can't make them anymore legally.
Whoa.
So it's FDA, they just did it in November.
Wow.
So it's because they're not patented. So what I can almost guarantee you what's going to happen is the pharmaceutical companies are going to come out with a patented BPC 157, and then they'll be like, okay, now you can get it through this big pharma agency because,
Wow.
And because that's what they did with, I don't know if you've heard trizepatide or Mounjaro.
No,
Mounjaro is the second generation of Ozempic. So it's a GLP-1 agonist, so it helps with satiety, but then also improves insulin sensitivity, so it helps your body process sugar better. So it has dual benefits. So that's why they call it second generation Ozempic, because it's more effective. And the generic form is though called trizepatide, which you can get from any of these places that sell peptides, basically. But what they did was the pharmaceutical companies basically just add like a complex onto that trizepatide that doesn't really do anything, it's inert, but then it can be patented. And then they can, go through that whole process of like FDA and pharmaceutical route of getting prescriptions. And then that way, but then it's like 10 times the price of the one you can just get from like a compounding pharmacy.
Right.
But then it's covered by insurance. So it's this game, right? Of like insurance and pharma and, regulatory bodies kind of all working together to keep their system going for them.
It's got to be very frustrating as a physician who's just out here trying to help people.
Well, it is, because I think there's so many things that fall outside of that system that can be so helpful and life-changing for people. And I've seen it. Like, obviously, I'm still an interventional doctor. I still treat people, and I that's, to me, is the most important thing, is helping people who have kind of reached the limits of the medical system and have nowhere to go. So those are the type of people that I feel are abandoned in a sense, and like there's no one really to help them, and they're on their own to figure it out.
Is this what is sometimes referred to as regenerative medicine? Yes.
So regenerative medicine has become a little bit of a buzzword. So it's the concept of basically repairing or restoring tissue back to a previous state. I kind of like the word cell. What I use now more is like cell and gene therapy. We're trying to use cell and gene therapy to repair your body. And so there's different, obviously we talked about how there's so many different cell types, and now with gene therapy too, there's more and more advances happening with that as well. So, and the intersection of cell therapy, gene therapy, and tissue engineering is kind of like the holy grail of regenerative medicine. But now that I'm learning more about bioelectricity too, I think bioelectricity is probably going to be a component of that too.
What is that? Unpack that for us.
So bioelectricity is just, what it sounds like. It's using electrical signals. I'm sure most people have heard of like those TENS units and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But those, that's like a very antiquated technology now, because they can modulate or control the signaling of the frequency of the electrical signal they're sending to your body, the amplitude, how long, and they can actually change gene expression. So meaning they can help, they can use bioelectricity to treat all sorts of conditions. They can use bioelectricity for cosmetics. They're using bioelectricity. Have you seen those suits that people wear for?
No.
So you wear the suit, and it's like, it basically stimulates your muscles, but it's using bioelectricity. So the workout that you do actually gets more effective in a sense. You could do a lower amount of volume and you will still get the same benefits or muscle damage. And there's Neuro 20 is one of those suits, Catalyst. There's a few companies making them. I think there's like 3 or 4 companies, but they're all the same principle, which is using bioelectricity to stimulate your muscles more so than you would without the suit.
Wow, it sounds dope.
Yeah, it's basically like people who are really busy or people who don't have the, or for me, but I'm personally interested in using it now because like if I'm traveling or if I'm at a hotel and I have 20, 30 minutes, you can put that suit on and you could do a workout and you could still get a pretty effective workout. And I've done it. It's like, to me, I'm so like against gimmicky stuff. I thought this was like super, I'm like, this looks so cheesy. Why the heck would I do this? Especially because I'm pretty into weight training my whole life. And I'm like, this is stupid. Like there's no way this works. And then, but I tried it and I was like, holy crap. My legs were so sore the next day. And wow. I felt like I had so much muscle damage that normally would take me like a lot more exercises to do, you know what I mean?
Yeah. You were a personal trainer, were you not, before you became a physician?
Yeah.
Tell me about that journey.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like being a personal trainer gives you such a unique vantage point in medicine because if you just go directly into medicine, which obviously most doctors do, you don't see the other side of health, which is prevention, which is nutrition, which is like lifestyle, right? All the other stuff that you, as a personal trainer, you can obviously see people's lives change. Like I remember having clients that actually got off their diabetic medications just from exercise. But in medical school, we were never taught that. Like we had one lecture on nutrition, which was the Canada Food Guide. So that's basically like, eat lots of dairy and wheat. And like, it was just, so it's like kind of a joke. And for me, I was just like, okay, but obviously my colleagues, they don't really question it because they're thinking about disease. They're thinking about like the traditional allopathic medicine, which is like drugs and surgery, but they're not thinking about all the lifestyle stuff.
Yeah, it's a big problem. I know physicians are highly undertrained when it comes to the potential benefits of exercise, which is disease modifying in so many instances. And then nutrition, the fact that they use like this, like what is essentially an instrument for commerce to teach physicians to be about the role that nutrition plays in health. It just seems, totally counterproductive. Yeah,
and the whole concept that I like about regenerative medicine is that it's all designed to manipulate signals in your body. And food is also a signal to your body. And that's the way I like to think about food. It's information. So what's the information it's going to send if you eat like a Twinkie or like some fried, chips and fish and chips versus like minimally processed, like let's say organ meat or something that's very nutrient dense, right? Like there's going to be different signals that are going to have different effects on gene expression and all this stuff. So and obviously over time that's going to add up. So I think a lot of physicians I still see it, like especially with like autoimmune conditions where they're just like, oh, it doesn't matter what you eat. It's like, what?
Yeah.
How can you say that in 2024?
Exactly. I just read a headline where some guy took it upon himself to eat nothing but Costco hot dogs for 30 days. And he said his stomach was an absolute war zone, but he lost weight in the process. So I feel like for people that are solely focused on, calorie counting and, that whole if it fits your macros, which I'm sure you're familiar with, having a personal trainer mentality about nutrition, it's leaving this whole swath of the power of nutrition basically unexplored, right?
Yeah, and that's a problem with, I think, like coming from that world, is that it's not just about the macronutrients, the micronutrients and the signals that it sends. It's not going to only affect your health, but it does actually affect how your body processes calories. Because a lot of people are just like, oh, it's just calories in, calories out. It's not that simple, because if you eat, let's the hot dog man, what's going to happen to his body is he's obviously going to develop chronic inflammation. And there's other things too. Like we know that when you eat a lot of processed foods, your BDNF in your brain goes down too, right? Brain derived neurotropic factor. So that can obviously, that's been linked to so many things like depression and dementia and like cognitive decline, right? So I'm not saying he's going to develop it over the 30 days, but the point is there's going to be all these changes in his physiology that's going to happen. And then what that does is when you have these chronic inflammatory pathways getting activated, there's something called cytokines, which are basically signals that get sent that can block almost your normal homeostasis, meaning it can affect metabolic pathways. So for example, like you have Krebs cycle and you have all these different metabolic pathways and how your body processes sugar, fat, lipid period, like and those can actually be affected by chronic inflammation. So when you have, so it's not as simple as calories in, calories out, because if you have you're in a chronically inflamed state, the metabolic processes that are responsible for that are going to be down regulated, so they're not going to work as well. So then your body's not going to process things as well. And then there's also something called thermic. I don't know if you've heard of thermic effective food. Like, for example, protein has a higher thermic effective food than fat. So if you eat more protein, it's going to be not only more filling, your body has to use more calories to process that.
Yeah, you get a bit of a caloric free ride, right? From calories ingested via protein. Super interesting. Yeah, I mean, these foods are associated with heightened levels of inflammation. They're also nutrient poor. I mean, these Costco hot dogs, they're like, obviously one would assume he's consuming the bun as well, which is high, and it's like predominantly refined grains, very little nutrition there. The hot dog, who knows, what nutrients are left in that meat after all of the, many processing steps that it underwent. So you're depriving yourself of micronutrients that we know are super important for anti-aging purposes.
I think they're also, from what I am understanding more about those processed foods, they're also depleting your body of nutrients. Like they actually, make your body work harder to achieve the same task. So your body has to use more nutrients to be able to achieve the same metabolic work.
Wow.
And so that's the problem. So it's not just it's worse than you think.
Yeah, worse than you think. Yeah, no, I mean, today the public health statistics are dismal, and your average adult today is now consuming 60% of their calories from these ultra processed foods, right? Which I think is, it's no wonder you hear terrifying statistics, like by the year 2030, 1 in 2 adults are going to be not just overweight but obese, and then we see all the associated conditions like type 2 diabetes, dementia, cardiovascular disease, and cancer.
And they're all consequence of that. And the reality is, I mean, maybe you're more hopeful. I'm not very hopeful that our whole system and environment is going to change in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So the only solution I see, maybe I'm a little bit biased, are these things which build more resiliency in your body. So what do I mean by that? So for example, there's something called fecal microbial transplant, which is where you transplant new gut bacteria into your gut. And traditionally that's been done through colonoscopy, but now you can do it through pills, so it's going to be more accessible. And I love bringing up this study of this microbiologist who was also a Taiwanese world champion weightlifter. And so, like Superwoman, right? And so basically she studied her poop, and then they figured out that she had this special bacteria called OLP01, which is a bifidobacterium. And if you transplant that into other people, it actually improves their cardiovascular fitness and health.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Where do we find this bacteria?
Exactly. We're going to be offering that sometime next year.
Damn.
So
that's crazy.
I'm sure that product will sell very well.
Do you think that something like a probiotic could ultimately have such a profound
It's transitory.
effect?
It's transitory. It's very unlikely it doesn't repopulate the gut. You have to transplant new gut microbes. So probiotics aren't going to really do much. Like there are some high-end ones, like VSL number 3 and like those really super high-end powders that maybe do something, but even those you probably have to, it's hard to know if you're going to get sustained benefit from them.
So I want to go back to exosomes. So you guys typically use these, you inject them to the site of injury. Is that kind of how it works?
So the most common thing I treat are like chronic, like I was saying, like osteoarthritis, like chronic, like shoulder pain, back pain, stuff like that. And then we'll use imaging, and then we'll use X-ray and ultrasound guidance, and we'll guide needles directly into the area. And exosomes are really effective for soft tissue injuries because they have all those growth factors and, like the soup we talked about, to help promote the body to heal.
Wow. And how do you locate the site of injury? Because I feel like I suffer from chronic low back pain. Actually, I would love to talk to you about that at some point, maybe even see you as a patient. But like, it's very hard for even myself to identify the source of the pain. Like,
diagnostics, exactly. And that's where you have to be a really good diagnostician, which is a big problem in conventional medicine too, because especially in the US, because you guys are just like MRI for everyone, and like in Canada, because we're so like resource limited, we barely order MRIs. Like we're really like conservative with that stuff, so we have to like do like a proper history, a physical, like we have to we do an ultrasound exam. We really try to assess where is this pain coming from, where are the pain generators, and especially with chronic back pain, it could be your facet joints, it could be your disc, it could be the nerves, it could be the muscle, the ligaments. There's a lot of different pain generators, so it could be referred from somewhere else. So it's not as simple as just being like, okay, the MRI says this, therefore this is your problem. That's not, and we know that for a fact. There's not a 1-to-1 correlation. Like if you did an MRI on like 100 people walking down the street over like age 40 on their, like, let's say their shoulder, like half of them would have rotator cuff tears, but they're not in pain. So that there's not a perfect correlation. So that's why you have to use clinical judgment. And I've seen that time and time again, where people go to other clinics or other doctors, and if they're not good diagnosticians and figure out exactly what the problem is and identify the pain generator, then it doesn't matter if you use the best stem cells in the world. If you put them in the wrong place, they're not going to do anything.
Yeah.
So that precision is very important. And that's kind of been my, I guess, claim to fame a little bit, because I train with Dr. Gallia, who's kind of the first one in the world to use ultrasound imaging to guide the needle and to inject like platelet-rich plasma, the PRP, into tears. And so he was like kind of the pioneer of that. So I was lucky because I got trained by him. We're very good at diagnostics. So for you, we could figure out exactly where the problem is coming from, and then that's where we would inject the exosomes and stem cells.
And where do you get the exosomes from?
So as of now, we have the first generation and second generation. So first generation is from umbilical cord tissue, just like the soup that's basically isolated when we grow the stem cells. And then the second generation is a genetic reprogrammed one from the skin biopsy.
Wow.
So then we isolate the exosomes from that. But that's more for cosmetics, because the skin one, obviously because it comes from a skin cell line, is good for cosmetics for the face. Yeah.
Got it. And there's no, because I'm assuming you, like, from a male, where would you get those exosomes from? Like, you would just get them from a donor?
Yeah.
Placenta? Or umbilical cord?
Yeah, exactly. So after C-section birth, we take the umbilical cord tissue, and we have a whole process on how to isolate it and make sure. Obviously, there's a lot of safety that has to go into, because you're putting other people's cells into your body. So you got to make sure there's lots of testing done not only on infectious diseases, but the quality of the cells. And the biggest detail people need to understand, because there's a lot of these like predatory stem cell clinics like all over South America, and they just do a good job marketing, and they're not growing their stem cells properly. And what do I mean by that is that if you grow the stem cells too many times, meaning you let them divide too many times, it's called passages, then their cells actually decrease in viability, which means they won't survive, and you'll actually have more senescent cells. And then the quality of the stem cells actually goes down too. So most of these clinics are doing like 6 passages, 8 passages. We limit our passages to like 3. And that's something I learned in Asia. So that's just something I try to make sure on the manufacturing side, we're doing everything we can to give you the best chance of success. Because the stem cells do work, but if they don't survive, they're not going to do anything. And a lot of these cells don't survive, and we know that. So the biggest, hottest area of research right now is there's iPSCs, because they have enhanced survival, and then you can use genetic engineering to improve survival, and then you can also use what are called hydrogel scaffolds and like 3D bioprinting to kind of embed them into, and then they get protected from the immune system and have more survivability.
Wow. Is there like a quick and easy way for you to describe the difference between, because we've talked about exosomes, we've talked about stem cells, and then PRP, platelet-rich plasma. Yeah. So how might one determine?
Yeah, so I like to think of it like a ladder in terms of like interventions of like most, like not only like least expensive to most expensive, but also like probably like most accessible to least accessible. And so that's because like PRP is like the most basic, like you can get it anywhere almost now, because pretty much any sports clinic offers it. But the problem with PRP is that it's only as good as your own plasma, right? Because you're taking your blood, you're spinning it, and you're separating out the plasma, and you're concentrating the platelets. And the platelets are kind of like the dosage and the medication, so to speak, that's going to send your body signals to help with healing and regeneration. But the platelets, the growth factor, there's something called a cytokine profile. So cytokine profile is what we talked about a little bit earlier, is how many growth factors are in there that are going to promote regeneration, and then how many anti-inflammatory signals are in there that are going to reduce inflammation. So that's the cytokine profile. So cytokine profile of a PRP of like someone like you who's healthy versus like a 60-year-old guy who smokes, eats bacon for breakfast, and all sorts of stuff, or the hot dog man, like what's this PRP going to be like?
There's likely going to be a lot less of the anti-inflammatory cytokines, more of the pro-inflammatory cytokines.
And there's been studies on that. And so you're going to have so much variability in terms of results for that reason. And that's why PRP is so like mixed, right? And it's not really great for chronic degenerative conditions. It's really good for like acute muscle tendon tears. Like for pro athletes, we use it a lot, because like if they like say the mid-season they tear something and they want to get back, PRP will definitely help with that in addition to peptides. But if you have something that's more chronic degenerative, that's where exosomes and stem cells come in. So exosomes, just to put it in context, exosomes have about 10 times more cytokine profile. So they have 10 times more growth factors and anti-inflammatory signals than PRP.
Wow.
And then stem cells have like about 20. So, but that's double of what exosomes have. But the point is it's a magnitude of order difference between PRP and exosomes. So it's a huge difference when you're looking at just a cytokine profile. And that's why the results are so much more superior when it comes to soft tissue injuries, because you just have so many more signals that are telling your body to help heal. And I've had many NHL and NFL players who tried PRP, and it didn't work. And then the exosomes work great.
So, but with PRP, you're injecting basically somebody's own plasma back into them, like to the site of injury. With exosomes, you're getting them from a donor.
Exactly.
Is there like an immunologic response because you're injecting somebody else's?
No, and that's the beauty of these technologies. They're all what's called immunoprivileged. So there's no HLA antigen, so there's no stimulatory effect, and so there's zero chance of like rejection or graft versus host disease. A lot of people, I think, because when they think of stem cells, they think of like stem cell transplants. And that's called hematopoietic stem cells, HSCs. So that's different from mesenchymal stem cells. So that's why if you have HSCs, you have to have cross-matching. That's why, people probably heard this colloquially like, oh, you're getting a bone marrow transplant. Are they a match or stuff like that? That's why, because there's HSCs. But MSCs don't have to be a match. But the problem with MSCs, though, the first generation MSCs still, is that they are still a little bit immunogenic. So you're not going to get graft versus host disease or rejection, but you're still going to get your immune system to eventually clear them out. So they don't stick around that long. That's why the second generation is so good, because they're gene edited to be hypoimmune. So they stick around longer. So they can do more of their good stuff.
Wow. So cool. Where do you see this all go, like trending towards? Like, say, 5 years from now, if you had like a crystal ball, 10 years from now?
I see like full organ regeneration.
Whoa. Meaning
probably cartilage will be solved first, because the knee is like an organ now. That's what we define it as. Like it's its own organ system, and so we're getting pretty close to being able to regenerate cartilage, and you could resurface an entire joint using tissue engineering with those embedded stem cells, and then resurfacing the joint using arthroscopic surgery. So instead of getting joint replacement, you could just regrow a new knee, so to speak. So that's not far away. And then, I mean, I would say in 10 years, I'd be surprised if we can't like regrow like a kidney or pancreas. Heart, it will probably be like a bit more challenging, but I could see those organs being done by 2035. Yeah.
I remember hearing a TED talk from a guy named Anthony Atala, I think his name was, and he was talking about the fact that, just a couple of years away, we're completely lab grown, like the way that we're doing in vitro meat now, they were starting to grow human kidneys.
Yeah. I saw that talk. Yeah.
Like 10 years ago or something like that, right?
Yeah, no, it's, I feel like it's always hard. I know, I feel like a lot of times people are like, oh, we're only 5 years away. We're only 10 years away. And then you go up 10 years later, nothing happens. But I really feel like we are actually getting close, because there's just an explosion of research. And look at where we are already with iPSCs. We're already doing that with iPSCs, right? We're already regenerating new neurons. We're already regenerating new pancreases using beta islet cells, like new insulin producing beta islet cells. So this is already happening. So it's not like science fiction anymore. Yeah. So it's only going to get better and better.
A lot of these injuries that we're talking about, I've heard you reference on somebody else's show, typically are the end stage of chronic disease, exactly, right? Chronic conditions of modernity. What proportion of chronic disease would you say is attributable these days to lifestyle?
Professor David Katz, Katz, he published like a large epidemiological study on this, and he said, and I agree with it, and this is the best data I think we have, is about 80% of chronic disease, including cancer, is attributable to lifestyle.
Wow.
80%, that's massive, right? But as to our earlier discussion, unless there's so many system changes that have to happen for people to be able to live a healthy lifestyle where it's easy. Right now, the environment's setting you up for failure, right? There's processed food everywhere. It's way cheaper to eat unhealthy. It's hard to be active, right? So what I see, and I maybe I'm a little bit biased, but what I see is like us transplanting microbes into your body, cells and gene therapy, all these different things that'll make your body more resilient to the environment and almost like hack your body in a way. Like I never liked the word biohacking, but now I kind of like it, because we're actually in a real biohacking era where we can actually hack your body in a sense to almost manipulate it to get the benefits of exercise without actually having to exercise, because that's what our follistatin gene therapy does. So follistatin is a peptide that's been around for like 20, 30 years. And with the injection that we have, it basically secretes the follistatin for 18 to 24 months. And what that does is it inhibits myostatin, which sets a limit on how much muscle you can put on. So you can put on more muscle without even exercising, when we've seen that in our clinical trial. But it also increases energy and just vitality and just makes you feel younger.
Wow.
So it's pretty cool. And just with an injection, it's not an exercise in a pill, but it's like closest thing to exercise in a syringe that's out there right now.
Whoa, and it's called follistatin?
Gene therapy, yeah.
Gene therapy.
Yeah.
And it's just like, how often do you have to inject it? And what is it? It's a peptide?
It's a peptide, but the delivery mechanism is in a gene therapy vector. So what do I mean by vector? So I can explain vector because everyone knows about COVID, obviously. So COVID vaccine, the vector was a lipid nanoparticle vector. So a vector is just a a vehicle to carry the DNA material that you're trying to deliver to the cell. So obviously the lipid nanoparticle vector carried the mRNA that they tried to deliver to the cell. So this is a vector, a plasmid vector. So what that means is it comes from E. coli, like a bacteria, but there's no live bacteria in there. A plasmid is just like a circular strand of DNA, and then the vector carries the follistatin gene and then helps your body and then just tells the cell to express more follistatin. And then that follistatin goes into your circulation and your levels like optimized for 18 to 24 months with one injection. So, because the problem with follistatin, as with many peptides, like even like insulin, is like you have to inject yourself multiple times a day because it's such a short half-life. But no one's going to do that for like every day for like, for years.
Is there a part of you though that thinks like in the back of your head skeptically like what could possibly go wrong? We're injecting all these crazy things, gene therapy. I mean, people are out there afraid of eating GMO food, and you're saying we're like ultimately going to be like injecting these compounds into us that are like reprogramming our own DNA, like straight into our blood.
Yeah, that's why I think you have to understand the mechanistic basis of how these things work, and there has to be a lot of research and science before you can say safely for sure that it's not going to cause any harm. And that's because follistatin itself has been around for 20 years. It's not like it's a new molecule. And we know it's very tissue specific, so it's not going to act on your heart or make your heart bigger. We know it, and in the clinical trial we did, we showed like on average people had 11 years intrinsic biological age reduction. It's debatable if these age tests are really accurate or not, but the point is it reduced systemic chronic inflammation and it consistently improved energy and strength and body recomposition. So those are all going to be positive things for your health.
Yeah.
Like you can't really argue with that. You know what I mean?
Well, it's super interesting because there are a lot of risks associated with TRT, but I know, I don't have a single peer at this point that isn't on TRT. I'm 41, and a lot of my friends who are even younger than I am, I'm not on it, on any form of TRT, but they're taking TRT, and there are fertility implications, and the like, but something like this, I mean,
the safety it's because if you understand it, it's what's the risk is like the only side effect we've seen so far is I think 20% of people had increased libido, so that's not a terrible.
Sounds great, yeah.
And then for TRT, to your point, it's about risk benefit. So what's anytime you're looking at any intervention, what's going to be the benefit versus the risk, right? And in medicine, it's called number needed to treat versus number needed to harm. So it's like how many people do we have to treat for this to actually have a meaningful benefit clinically, versus how many people are going to get harmed for this amount of people to get that benefit.
Yeah.
So for example, because a lot of people think, if I take this drug, it's going to help me. But a lot of drugs, number needed to treat is like 1 in 200. Or there's a drug called Trulicity, which is for diabetes. Its number needed to treat is 1 over 327. So that means you have to treat 327 people for it to actually have a significant impact on like mortality.
Wow.
And how many people are going to get harmed. So the number needed, and there's side effects to these drugs, right? A lot of them have side effects. It's like 10, 15%. So the number needed to harm is way higher than the number needed to treat, yet it's still approved and allowed to be prescribed. So it's not always as simple as like just saying, just because FDA approved it, it's great for me, and that's going to do something for me. So that's the biggest problem right now, I think, with the whole kind of traditional approach is that people aren't looking at like this model of like, okay, why not try something that's going to be that we know is safe, is not harmful, and could potentially have the same benefit, like exosome injections for a tear. Why not try that first before getting surgery? What's the downside? It doesn't work. That's the downside essentially.
No other risks.
No other risks.
Wow.
So why wouldn't you consider it first if you have the means to do it? A lot of these things are not covered by insurance. So I think that's probably the biggest drawback right now is the expense. But aside from that, like most people, like the vast majority of people I see, like even people who are just coming in just to have consultations for pain and stuff, they'd rather try this stuff first before going under the knife.
What would you say are for people, who are more prevention minded, myself included, who, not to, take these off the table were I to one day need or want to experiment with them, but like the big levers for, anti-aging prevention that people can institute right now?
I think aside from lifestyle, the basics are basics and they're never going to change. The number one, by far, I think most important thing is doing progressive overload resistance training, which is easier said than done because progressive overload resistance training requires periodization, which means you can't just give your body the same workout every time indefinitely because your body will adapt. Your body's smart. So I think an investment into a good trainer or a good coach or a good program where they're periodizing your program is going to probably be the best investment into your health by far. And then from there, it's obviously all the stuff like you talk about, like nutrition, like there's all these other like sleep, stress, meditation, like all that stuff is obviously going to be the foundation. And one of the things that I think probably is ignored a lot by a lot of, do you know Brian Johnson, the guy who spends...
Yeah, somewhat familiar. I'm not familiar with his like protocol or anything.
Yeah, but he's kind of like obsessed about like trying to live as long as possible. Like he did our false status, stuff like that. But but the problem is, what I think he's missing is also the component that not talked about enough is like social connection and meaning. Because that stuff is actually really important for your health and longevity as well, and aging. Because if you're stressed all the time and you have no real meaning and you don't feel connected to people, like you better believe that like something like loneliness, for example, is worse for your health than like smoking.
Yeah.
Or like I think it's like 1 pack of cigarettes a day or something like that. So the point is, it has detrimental effects on your body. So I think those things are important to remember. But from like what's the one intervention that's going to have the biggest impact on aging, like right now it does seem to be like the follistatin and gene therapy. I mean, we showed it in the trial how much it could increase telomere length and reduce intrinsic biological age reduction. So we're actually applying for something called the X Prize, which is this prize that is basically awarded for anyone who can show 3 organ system 10 or more years age reduction, which we're going to be able to show.
Is this like the new health span prize that they recently announced? Oh, cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. I love the emphasis that you've placed on resistance training, which may or may not have been influenced by your tenure as a personal trainer. I do want to give like a shout out of appreciation to our personal trainers who I think are truly on the front lines of healthcare for so many individuals, They
are, and they're trusted sources. Like a lot of my best, like, I mean, not to put family doctors on their bus, but a lot of, like, honestly, I feel like trainers know more about health than the family doctor is. And it's just a reality of it. And a lot of people trust their trainers when it comes to their health. And so a lot of my referrals for a lot of the patients I treat are actually from trainers because they understand that they're like, hey, the stuff that Dr. Khan can do in their group, what we can do for them can actually be beneficial because it can get you out of chronic pain, or it can help with the energy, or it can help with anxiety, or whatever it may be. That whatever intervention we're going to do ultimately is going to make them potentially more compliant with the other stuff. Because if you're tired, you're in pain, or if you have anxiety or whatever, like these kind of things, it's going to be really hard for you to stick to a consistent regimen. So that's what our interventions can do, is it can give you that resiliency and give you that ability to stick to those healthy behaviors longer.
I love that. What role, I feel like mold is a trending concern for people today.
Yeah, and Michaela's huge on this, and so is Dave Asprey and a lot of other people who were kind of talking about it for a while. But now I think we're going to be, in like 20 years, we'll look back and we'll be like, wow, toxic mold was like asbestos in like this era.
Wow.
It's like that bad. It's like it's almost like it's epidemic, and it's the exposure. We all get exposed to like something like 200 fungal spores, I think, is like what the average person has in their body, meaning that if you measure these different mycotoxins, you're going to find them in almost everyone. So the issue though is some people have genetic variations that don't allow them to clear it, or their body doesn't have the resiliency, or they don't sweat. So sweat is one of the best ways, and especially it can't be like sauna sweat. It has to be actual movement-based sweat because it activates something called hormone-sensitive lipase, which is an enzyme that essentially helps to mobilize toxins from your fat.
Right.
But that can only get activated when you actually do exercise and sweat.
It doesn't get activated from saunas, sitting in a sauna. Wow, that's super interesting.
And that's why it's interesting, because some people don't sweat when they work out. And it's like, why am I not sweating? Like, or it's very hard for them to sweat. I don't know if we fully figured that out, but my theory, at least on that, is that there's the intracellular pathogen, which is the fungal spores, hijacks the cell, and basically is in a way, it's kind of protecting itself from pretending, like making you sweat less, so it doesn't leave your body.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's because, and there's actually a huge theory on cancer now. It's called cell suppression theory by Mark Lintron. It's probably the most unified theory about cancer that's out there, because it explains all 10 hallmarks of cancer. And cell suppression theory basically says that there's intercellular pathogens, so like organisms, like fungal organisms, that hijack the cell and prevent it from working properly. So suppressing the cell function. And it suppresses, like, for example, cellular apoptosis. So then the cells replicate indefinitely and all these other things. So, but that's probably the best theory out there that I've seen, and a lot of oncology societies are trying to recognize it as well.
Well, it's so interesting because I know that some people claim to be very sensitive to mold. They'll like look at the ceilings, right, on any room that they enter to determine if they perceive water damage.
Or they can just tell, or
they can just tell,
they can just tell there's mold because they can tell like they start getting congested or they start like brain fog or whatever it may be.
But why is it that some people are so sensitive to it?
It's
and
genetic
others,
variation.
Like, I've never.
Yeah, exactly.
Any.
My mom got exposed and she had we had it in her childhood home, but she had a hard time clearing it out, but I didn't. So it's most likely related to different mutations. Like I know MTHFR is probably one of them, but there's other ones too that you can look at. And that's why some people will have to do testing to figure out. But at the end of the day, is it really going to change management? For me, it's like once you've known you're exposed to mold and if you're having symptoms related to it, there's treatments you can do to help get rid of it from your body. Like there's a medication called cholestyramine, which is like kind of a binder to help remove it. And then there's other protocols you can do to help get rid of toxic mold. But it is a big problem. And I would say toxic mold and Lyme disease, like, yes, there's definitely a lot of pseudoscience in that space too. So you have to be careful because there's some doctors who just tell everyone they have that, but that's not always the cause of issues. But definitely it's still underdiagnosed in the mainstream medical community.
Is there what would you say are the gold standard tests to know whether or not you are sensitive to mold?
That's genetic. You have to do genetic testing to figure out the sensitivities.
Wow.
And then there's different mold tests that you can just order in the mail and they can ship them to your house, and then you can figure out if you have toxic mold.
Are you familiar with a condition called CIRS? CIRS. It stands for Chronic Inflammatory Response Syndrome.
Yeah.
What's the deal with that?
So I mean, again, it's a dysfunctional immune system. So your immune system, think of it like a child. And if you don't train that child properly, it's going to misbehave when it's older. And so how do you train the immune system properly? Get exposed to soil, get exposed to pets, get dirty when you're a kid, let your kid play and do things. Like these things can actually help to build a strong immune system. And we know that from studies where children who grow up on farms or have animals are less likely to have allergies when they're older. Or like C-section births, are more likely to have autoimmune conditions. And antibiotics given during childhood are more likely to have autoimmune conditions. So we are starting to understand that there's immune kind of resiliency that's built. And I like the analogy of like training a kid because it's like you have to train your immune system. Mm-hmm. And one of the best ways to train it, actually, funny enough, is actually exercise and resistance training. Why? Because when you put on muscle, it upregulates something called T regulatory cells. T regulatory cells are, as they suggest, they regulate part of your immune system. And if they become dysfunctional, then your immune system can also become dysfunctional. And so having muscle is a way to upregulate the function and kind of protective mechanism of that.
Wow. And those play a role in autoimmunity, do they not?
Yeah, exactly. And so with CIRS, what's happening is your immune system is sending this signal of chronic inflammation when eventually it should just stop. So why isn't the signal stopping? And that has to do with dysfunction. And why does that dysfunction start? There's so many different reasons. So but the point is, if you can restore the immune system from dysfunctional to normal, that's kind of the overarching theme of what we try to do. And how do we do that? One of the ways is actually intravenous stem cells, because intravenous stem cells, more than anything, because a lot of people think intravenous stem cells are like, stem cells try to repair, regrow tissue. But when we're using these intravenously, what they're doing is they're actually immunomodulating, or kind of like pressing the reboot button on your immune system. That's why there's clinical trials for like inflammatory bowel disease, like rheumatoid arthritis, where patients actually go into remission and get off their meds. Why is that? It's because it's reprogramming your immune system. So instead of just suppressing your immune system as like, I don't know if you've heard of like prednisone or methotrexate, like those are just drugs that like suppress your immune system, which is great. Like it's still helpful, but that's not really solving the problem, right? It's just suppressing it because you have an overactive immune system. So instead of trying to just suppress it, can we reprogram it to work better? And that's kind of the hot area of research. We still haven't fully figured it out, but we're getting pretty, like we have very like effective results with like the protocols we kind of have with peptides and bioregulators and intravenous stem cells, and then obviously the FMT because a lot of your immune system's in the gut, right?
Yeah, so it's so interesting. Vitamin D, correct me if I'm wrong, but plays a role in increasing T regulatory cell activity,
and that's why in Canada it kind of sucks because I think we have one of the highest prevalence of autoimmune conditions and like multiple sclerosis in the world, because like per capita, obviously we don't have a huge population, just because the lack of vitamin D.
Wow, lack of sun, essentially. Wow. And if memory serves, about 3/4 of the global population is deficient or insufficient in vitamin D.
It's crazy because, and in the Arab world, because I do work in Dubai too, all the women are covered up in
That's right.
And women's health there is like so neglected. It's actually it's really sad. And like no one ever, like it's just like, man, everyone's walking around deficient. And it doesn't matter how much sun there is, just like the desert, but like they're covered up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember reading a review that highlighted a role for vitamin D in multiple sclerosis as being like the only nutraceutical, like the only vitamin that actually has, evidence in support of a therapeutic role in the setting of multiple sclerosis.
Yeah, and I think, and again, let's come back to the principle of like, what's the harm? Like in taking vitamin D, there's no there's no harm. So versus taking like a lot of these like immunosuppressants, there is actual real harm. Like it can increase your risk of malignancies and cancer, and it can increase like prednisone can increase your risk of diabetes. Like there's all these harms with these medications, right? So my thing is, why not take a minimal invasive approach first and then see how that works?
A lot of people today are talking about nicotine, utilizing nicotine as a cognitive booster, like as a neurotropic.
Dave Asprey does that. Yeah.
Dave Asprey does that.
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson famously, he's obsessed with Zins. These like mouth pouches that people.
Right. Yeah.
Do you have any experience, any thoughts there? I know it's difficult to parse the research on nicotine from the research on smoking and how harmful.
It's basically acetylcholine receptors, and acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter in your brain. So when you do like sublingual nicotine, you spray it under your tongue, for example, it just stimulates acetylcholine production in your brain, and acetylcholine is a transmitter that helps with concentration, focus, and and that's why it's a nootropic. So I think in that form, yes, because you're not inhaling all the carcinogens that come with tobacco, right? So I think when people think nicotine, it's bad for you, but it's not that black or white.
Yeah.
So I definitely think there is benefits for it from a cognitive enhancement perspective. But the one that's like, I think the one peptide that it will get so much attention in the next few years is called Klotho. Klotho.
Oh, I'm familiar with Klotho.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah.
But it's a transmembrane protein, which means it's a gigantic protein, and it's an amazing potential for dementia and for as a nootropic and cognitive enhancement. It may even increase IQ. So what our next product is actually Klotho gene therapy. So we're starting the trial in March.
Dina Dubal is one of the like key researchers in that field, right, up in NorCal.
Well, right, yes, yeah. Like Klotho, there's a whole.
Well, I think she's identified it as being one of these like myokines or something expressed during exercise.
Exactly. Yeah. Follistatin and Klotho are both get released during high intensity exercise, but they're transitorily increased. Obviously, if you could have them increase all the time, like we can in the gene therapy, there's all these amazing benefits. So that's why we chose follistatin as our first product and then Klotho as our second product.
Wow. You are a true biohacker. I mean, I feel like oftentimes the term biohacking is applied to things like getting more sun and eating a healthy diet and like taking appropriate supplementation. But we're actually like getting into the nitty gritty of reprogramming that which makes us human, which I think is so exciting.
Yeah, that's why Dave, when I went on Dave's podcast, he was like, this is the day I've been waiting for. That's literally what he said because we did the follistatin for him, and he was just like, I've been waiting for this day for like 2 decades.
He wants to live to 180. Is that his goal?
I mean, I think he's even said he would like to live more than that,
Wow.
but yeah, I mean, I can realistically see like millennials and Gen Z, especially if you start these therapies now, I could see you living till you're like 120 or even more with like healthy, like not like where you're like, I don't think we're gonna be able, like we're not there yet where we can say, oh, you're gonna live till 200 or something like that. Maybe we will be one day, but for now, what I can say pretty confidently is that you'll be having a higher quality of life for a longer period of time.
Wow, super exciting. Cool, man. Well, this was fascinating. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, but I'm super excited to now have you in my own personal wheelhouse of people that I can refer to and source information from, because this is all like incredibly exciting stuff. Yeah, and I'm now on the wrong side of 40, so I've started to think about
yeah, exactly. I think you would. I mean, for yourself, but also we can fix up your back. I'm pretty confident we could do that. So I was the first doctor in Canada to do interventional pain with regenerative medicine, and the reason was because I saw all these patients with chronic neck and back pain, and I was like, they're not getting better, and like a lot of them. In back surgery, if the outcomes are like 50-50 long term, like just called failed back surgery syndrome. So that's how I got into it. So that's how I did interventional pain. So I have a lot of expertise with spine.
Yeah, and things just happen. I mean, when early 2022, I think it was early 2022. I developed Horner syndrome associated with migraines. We ruled out all the bad stuff. Horner syndrome is like this constellation of 3 hallmark features: ptosis, meiosis, and anhidrosis. And so I developed this like sunken eyelid, and I went, immediately. I was traveling at the time, but as soon as I had gotten back home, I went to the emergency room and I ruled out all the bad stuff, brain tumor, stroke, carotid dissection, mass in the lungs, all that bad stuff. And I think it's either, for me, it could be due to the occasional migraine that I get, or just idiopathic, but it's like, things happen. And so it's good to be able to have some of these more novel approaches in your back pocket for when they do. Yeah,
exactly. And a lot of it comes back to like I always say, like first principles or fundamental principles of biology, like what's the underlying process, and can we target that and narrow in on that. We're only getting better and better as each year passes.
Dope, man. Well, again, fascinating. And I've got one last question for you before we wrap. But where can people connect with you on social media and learn more about your work, and maybe even book an appointment at your clinic?
Yeah, I mean, for me, at dr.akhan, A-K-H-A-N, on Instagram. I think we also have TikTok, the Regen Doc. But eterna.health is our website, and you can just go on there and book an appointment. I am super inaccessible, just being honest, because of just, I travel and all the people and like doing so many things, but I have a team of doctors that I've trained and they're phenomenal, but, and they're obviously trained in our protocols and they have access to our therapies, and we're opening up clinics all over. Like we have one in Dubai, we're opening up one in Egypt, we have a partnership in Japan, and then obviously we work in Mexico and Canada. Yeah.
Amazing, dude. Well, thanks again for coming in. This was super fun. Last question that gets asked everybody on the show: what does living a genius life mean to you?
Building resiliency in your body to deal with all the health stressors that are in our environment.
And there are so many.
There are so many, and it's only getting worse because it's called evolutionary mismatch, which is basically it's the best explanation as to why we have chronic disease. Our environment is mismatched to our genes that we evolved for, right? Our genes evolved over like hundreds of thousands of years to kind of, be active, we used to, hunt animals. We used to do all these things, right? And our environment now, obviously sitting and being in front of screens and doing all these other things, are mismatched with what our genes are meant to do. So this evolutionary mismatch is only getting wider and wider because of modern society, which is great. Like we have all these amazing things, but then it's not great for our health. So it's like, how do we build resiliency in our body to kind of close that evolutionary gap, mismatch gap?
Yeah, I love it. Super important. Well, thanks, Dr. Khan, for coming in. This was, again, super fun. And I learned a ton. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.